Good morning, everybody. Emily Raclaw. I am a middle-aged, light-skinned Black woman with curly brown hair with a little light on the end, wearing a cable knit fabulous ivory-colored sweater. Um, Go ahead, Molly, you can describe yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Molly. I am a white woman in her early 20s. I have brown hair and I'm wearing a navy blue shirt.
Excellent. So to kind of give some context of where this presentation is coming from, initially I had a whole entire different idea of how I wanted to do this. I was going to be like, I know so much, let's talk about all these things. But as I've been working with Molly for her whole time she's been here at Marquette, and as she's getting ready to graduate in December, these conversations are things we've just been doing, I want to say since the end of last semester, and even more so right now. And I kind of thought, rather than saying, hey, here are all the things you're supposed to do, I'm thinking we should kind of just talk about what the issues are and normalize a lot of the things that are happening, and then talk about stuff that we've found to be useful for both my practice and also for Molly, and then kind of take questions from people to invite you into the conversation. So with that being said, I will jump into it and try to sound very smart. Next slide. So this, we have our challenges, which are that we have discouraged workers. That means that 85% right now of degree holding autistic adults are unemployed. I want to say where I got that statistic from, but every time I Googled it, it said a US Department of Labor report. I could not find that report, so there's an asterisk next to it for that reason. Number two is getting a job. The application process, interview process, even just that part, then starting the job, and then moving on into our personal lives, because all of those things are what being an adultiest adult really means. Okay, so next slide, please. So everyone tells you when you finish college, you're supposed to get a job right away. And that's all. They just say, get a job. They give no more instruction about what that is. They also don't really talk about what that really entails. I mean, if you've done an internship, you kind of know. And then they're like, if you just get an internship, you're totally going to get a job and get hired from those people. Don't worry about it. Um, but there's just a lot of pieces all the time that you're supposed to be managing, all while doing all your classwork. So let's kind of start with the challenges of getting a job. Molly, when we've been working together, working on all the multiple applications and things like that, what do you think were some of the most, what are the, like some of the biggest challenges and frustrations that we've been talking about?
I would say some of the biggest things are in terms of when you're actually looking at the job postings, knowing what's fits your skills and qualifications, just because some job postings list things as preferences versus requirements when they're not really requirements. Um, and then things like timelines. So waiting for companies to get back to you. Some of them will get back to you within a couple weeks. Some of them will take months.
Yeah, I think objectively job descriptions are written so vaguely, and then you find out women and neurodivergent people, technically like anyone who's not like a cis het white man usually won't apply for things unless they are meet like 70% of what they're asking. A good way to think about that is that job descriptions are like Christmas lists. You don't actually get everything you want. It's just, let's say these are all the things we want, and people pick and choose which ones qualify for them, and then they put them all out there. I feel like that's a really hard concept to grasp, just because if you're doing a job, we want to be able to do it well, right? Um, ooh, I messed up my screen. Sorry, everybody. The next thing is, so let's say we have successfully done the application. They have followed timelines. We knew the right time, that medium amount of time you're supposed to wait before returning a phone call and following up on emails versus doing it too quickly or too fast. Let's talk about interviews. I feel like, Molly, we've gone round and round talking about like what the actual purpose of interviews are and like what are we supposed to be doing in them. My favorite question is, tell me about yourself. So what challenges have we kind of talked about? And like, I guess also, I didn't say this before, but successes that we've talked about with job applications, interviews.
I would say my biggest frustration is just that Interviews are less about your actual answer to the question, and it's more about um, sort of marketing yourself, and it's kind of a charisma test, which I'm not always great at. There's a lot of pressure there. And I think that ambiguity about what you're actually being evaluated on is, um, there's a lot of pressure there. And then in terms of, I think what has gone well with the interview process, I think um, internship interviews have given me a lot of practice. And then also just try to take the pressure off myself in terms of like applying to a lot of jobs so that I have a lot of opportunities, because I know that there's some that I might just get nervous, and even if I am qualified for it, I might mess up the job interview because I am nervous. So just saying I'm gonna go in there, I'm just gonna do my best, and I tend to do better that way.
Yeah, I think something my dad always told me is that you always take the interview. And so applying for all the jobs, something to remember, and I think we've talked about this a lot of, it really doesn't matter if you want that job 100%. If you're interested in it and think you could do it for even a short period of time, apply for it. Because what is actually saying in the job description, what happens in the interview doesn't always also reflect what actually the job is. And it is always easier to get a job once you have a job. It's a great catch-22 there. Um, I think I really agree with what you said about marketing yourself. And it's almost like how you're saying the answer and how you're presenting yourself is more important than what you're actually saying in the interview, which seems so counterintuitive because you're supposed to be trying to fill a position of the qualities of the person. Like, let me try that again. The skills of the person versus like, do I want to have dinner or drinks with them, right? Okay, next slide, please. Muted myself. I should be really much better at not muting or unmuting myself this far along since 2020, but here we are. Okay, so congratulations, you have aced the application, gotten through the grueling interview process, and now we have started our jobs. Um, I have yet to think of something since kindergarten where being taught what to do actually involved doing the skill of the class. Like, okay, everyone line up. Now you do this. Now you do that. Um, so I guess, Molly, you've had 3 different professional experiences. I have not, I mean, I guess I had started this job about 4 years ago, but I have not had like the first college job experience since a very long time ago. I imagine it's very different now. What has kind of been your experience with the different onboarding? And I guess I'm also very curious about between you had the government positions and then the private sector positions, and if you found anything better with either one.
I would say my experiences have been very mixed. Some of them give you a lot of information, some of them give you very little information. Some of it, the information is like directly related to what you'll be doing. Others, they talk a lot, but none of it is like that helpful to what you'll be doing. Um, so it's been a pretty big mix. I found that the government ones were a little bit more specific. I had one in the mayor's office that was they had a lot of very specific information that they trained you on what you'll be doing and the best way to do it, and sort of like plan Bs and plan Cs and all of that. Um, versus my most recent internship in financial services, there were sort of no timelines, no goals. The onboarding was not related to your field, it was just related to the company in general, so um, much more vague.
Yeah. I've worked in both private and public sector, and I would agree that like looking at from that perspective of when I'm starting a job, the only thing we talk about is here are your benefits. Which health plan would you like to select? Also, if you're going to miss work, this is how you do it. It's very HR and procedure based. Um, and I think it feels like then I, one, don't know what I'm actually supposed to be expected to do. And then two, I feel like every job I've started, I've had to ask what the accommodation process is. I don't always necessarily need accommodations, but it's nice to know how I would actually go about getting them if I do need them. And I feel like even though there's that HR thing, it's a very small like little blurb part of it, right? Has it ever been made clear to you, Molly, how to go through the accommodation process if you were going to access them at work?
I can't say that that has ever been mentioned to me.
Yeah, it's like almost people don't want to be like, I don't want to assume anything. And it just also then makes it less accessible and more difficult because, coming in higher ed, we're told, okay, do you need accommodations? And every single syllabus, every professor says it out loud. When students start struggling, one of the things professors sometimes gently will ask is like, oh, have you gone to the Office of Disability Services, or here are all the things that are available? And then you go to the real world, I guess, okay, college is real too. We're not in the matrix, but um, like when you go into the professional setting, it's all of a sudden no one wants to help you find the access to the things that will make things more accessible. Um, the other thing I think is like hidden agendas when you start a job. I know the most recent, um, what's it called, internship you had, they'd had you kind of like paired up with someone to kind of talk about like how to better adjust or like how to do the things in the job. Um, did they talk to you about like what the social expectations at work were at all?
A little bit. I did find that to be very helpful. I think in a position where you're not given a lot of information, it's good to have someone to go to. But obviously, then the prerogative is put on you to ask questions rather than, things being presented to you. And you might not always know what questions to ask.
Yeah, I feel like when anyone ever asks, what do you have any questions? I have so many questions in my head, but I can't determine what is the appropriate question to ask. And is a question I'm thinking of, is that the appropriate question to ask right now, or who do I ask? Um, I've I feel like when I was working for government positions, I had a very clear hierarchy of like who I was supposed to go to for what, and that made me feel much more comfortable. I'm someone who gets very anxious if I don't have the information I need, and then I panic if I don't know who to ask for it. I also wish that someone would tell me what the policy for birthdays are in offices because I feel like everybody does it differently. And I think so much of being successful in a career is that piece that happens outside of work, or that piece that happens not directly reflective of the work you're doing, but when there was like there was someone's birthday, or there was a celebration at work, or someone went to some golf outing. I don't know how to golf, so I'm in trouble there. But you know, that's where the connections are being made, and that's when people are deciding, oh, I want that person on my team. Um, I feel like part of onboarding would be great to say, here, what do you want to do for your career path? Like, how do you want to be, like, move through this company? Um, and I think finding a way to ask them then that, like, who is the person I talk to about what my goals are, would be super helpful. I know I didn't plan for this. This is just a rant I came up with last night in the middle of the night about helping people better plan their career path with that company. Um, you can add any thoughts to that if you want, Molly. You don't have to. Um,
Yeah, I think you got it all. Yeah.
I muted myself again. All right, next slide. Okay, so everyone talks about this elusive work-life balance. I'm a working parent. I still don't know what that actually means. Um, but I also feel like there's this concept among neurotypicals of this medium amount of everything. So you don't want to do too little of one thing or too much of another. There's like this unspoken medium amount. Um, However, it feels like then we're not doing everything well. Like, when you're in school, when you're doing classes, you can like, okay, I'm going to do really well on all these exams. And then when those are done, then I can go hang out with my friends, do whatever. But it feels like in the world of work, work is never done because that's why we have jobs. Uh, so what have you found, I mean, especially this summer, about like finding that balance between work and not work and doing fun things?
Yeah, that's huge. I would say so. My first two internships were during the school year, and having that balance between work, internship, and social life, it felt fairly intuitive, maybe difficult, but it made sense. But this internship was, your standard 40 hours a week, and suddenly, yeah, things were so much more difficult. It feels like the 40 hours is all 24 hours a day. Um, so I can see how it would be very difficult, the transition into that and then just figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah, you would think that having to study full time and if you're working also, like when you're taking, 15, 16, whatever credits, plus then you have your job on campus, you're like, yeah, I know how to balance that. But working 40 hours a week, man, it is exhausting. Like in theory, it sounds like it should be less hard because it's like, oh, I'm just going to work. I don't have to study. I don't have to do that thing. But switching from having class at 10 and then maybe another class at 2 is very difficult to now I have to have sustained attention, shifting different priorities based on the whim between the hours of, for pretend 8 and 4 or whatever, right? Um, I feel like that's something we've talked about a lot on how to build that stamina and how to do those things. And we'll kind of talk about some strategies for that in a little bit. But do you think you were prepared, like this summer, do you think you were prepared at all for like what that was going to be like versus how you've experienced internships before?
Um, the thing is, I knew it was going to be rough. So in that sense, yes. But in terms of like actually experiencing it, I was just exhausted a lot. Um, I feel like on paper it shouldn't be that rough because I mean right now I'm not as involved in as many activities, but I'm still of course working. Right now it's like 12 hours a week, but like in the past I've been involved with 3 different activities a week and then working 10 hours a week and then I have 18 credit hours. And so it shouldn't be that difficult of a transition, but I think the fact that you're doing the same thing for 8 hours every single day, probably in the same place, maybe at the same desk for 8 hours a day, around the same people, makes it a lot more exhausting.
Yeah. When you put it like that, it's like, wow, that is very different than school, right? Even though school might be more challenging in sense of I have to do this class and then I have to do all these different executive functioning moving tasks. When you're doing the same thing and the same people, and then it, especially if you're working in a team of people, right, and you have to wait for each next step, and it's hard to know how to balance your time, your energy, your focus because of the nature of work. Versus I feel like when you're in school, you have so much more predictability in terms of how to use your spoons, as they say, right? Um, what about Molly? I know you have a pretty good, like, nice social circle here at Marquette. Do you have any concerns about like how you might find your source, like your social sources after you graduate?
That's definitely going to be a big focus for me. I know that finding a social circle, really building a strong one, is going to be very important to that transition. In terms of just having something to look forward to outside of work, having people to talk to about everything that's going on, that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be huge. And right now, I'm already thinking about ways to find that group. I'm taking a ballet class at Marquette right now since it's my last semester. I wanted to take a fun class. So I'm thinking, maybe I could take a ballet class in the city. So that sort of thing, because I know that it'll be really important to have that social group.
Yeah, and I think that you found that finding structured things that exist that are already in the community means it's way easier to make social connections, and you already have a built-in shared interest. So yeah. Um, okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this has been a hot topic. Everyone has heard about neurodiversity hiring initiatives. I've worked with a lot of them, and some of them have been really great to work with. But I guess my question is, I feel like no one has ever really asked the question to autistic or other forms of neurodivergent individuals, what does that even mean? When you hear, if an employer says under their DEI initiatives, we are neurodivergent friendly or we're friendly to autistic people, what would you actually expect that to look like?
I think the two biggest things are being proactive. So as we mentioned accommodations earlier, just asking, having an HR person ask, do you need accommodations? And then secondly, I think some basic expectation or understanding that employees, and this doesn't just apply to neurodivergent employees, but all employees have different methods for success. So Emily and I were talking about this previously, but in college, if a student said, I like to do my homework in the morning and I like to listen to music while I do it, everyone gets that. Everyone understands that people have different methods. They have a system that works for them. But once you're in the workforce, suddenly you're expected to all work oftentimes in the same room, in the same lighting, at the same desk with the same computers, same software, at the same times. Like there's so much less flexibility and there's so much less understanding with the way that people work and what works for them.
Oh my gosh, yes. I also feel like, you're not, when people say autism, like, oh yes, really good math and science. I didn't get the autism that makes me good at math or science. So that's sucks to be me. But like the fields seem to be very much like tech based, and I don't feel like for you, Molly, with like your areas of interest and where you really excel, like that doesn't really align with you either, your interests, right?
Yeah, I've gotten, I'd say, more interested in it, but it's not an affinity for me.
Yes. So I think thinking about like when you're looking at those hiring initiatives, if you're going to consider those as a source of employment, because it might make that transition easier for the reasons that Molly said, because it might be, they can be more flexible. You're not doing the same thing, same time, everybody else, more appeal, more fitting for that piece. There's also the drawback of sometimes maybe you might feel othered more than we might already feel in life. And then um, also kind of being limited by the fields and the companies they're in, but there are some benefits that might make that transition into the workforce feel a little less jarring. I know, Mel, you haven't participated in any of those, but as you expressed, like that's been kind of a lot of the going back and forth. My next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this is not great, this is awful, we don't really know what to do. I'm going to change the tune and talk about opportunities. The first thing to remember is that you can be kind to yourself. This is a transition. Change is hard for everybody. And if you haven't noticed, being in college is 4 years, 4+ years of one big transition. The first one is, how do I even do college? Then it's like, all right, I understand exactly what to do, how to do college. And then you get a new semester with new professors, with new expectations, new roommates, new whatever, new internships. Nothing has been super, super consistent while you're in college, no matter what you kind of what you try to tell yourself. And then you're now going into this big unknown thing, and it's hard and it's unknown, and it's okay for it to be awkward and hard. And you aren't the only one feeling that way. Everybody's feeling that way. Autistic, ADHDers, neurotypical people, everyone's feeling like, man, there's a lot of pressure. I should be doing this. Second of all, you have an opportunity to learn what works for you and learn what strategies work for you. There are strategies that work really well at school that might not transition into the world of work, but there are some that do. So I know, Molly, something that you like to do is you know what your limits are in terms of that's not even procrastination. It's just I know my workload and I work best this way, and it's effective. And in places of business, they call that sprinting, where they do really hard work, take a break, do really hard work. Um, and I think you said something to me that really resonated was like, I just gave myself permission to stop feeling guilty about procrastination, right? You can talk about that. Sorry.
Yeah, that was like huge. I would say all throughout high school and then at the beginning of college, um, I was always stressed about getting work done. And I was like, if I would just stop procrastinating, I would stop feeling so stressed. And then one day I realized, okay, am I stressed because I'm procrastinating or am I stressed because I've been told procrastinating is bad? Because I always got the work done and I was always getting good grades. And so I was like, is there anything wrong with this system? And so one day I said, okay, I'm gonna just accept that this is my system. I'm just gonna keep doing it like this, but I'm gonna stop feeling bad about it. And I continued to get the work done. I continued to get good grades, but I just stopped feeling so stressed all the time. So that was a huge change to my system.
Right. I think acknowledging that how you do things doesn't have to be how everybody else does it. Um, Now, to be clear, so no one thinks we're saying procrastination is the best, Molly's form of procrastination works really well, because you're still meeting deadlines, you're not holding up group projects, anything else. It just, you are being able to do work on your own timeline. I also didn't prep for this question, but I just want to check that like using that, taking that mindset into internships has also been successful for you.
I would definitely say it has. I don't, it's, the thing is, It's not really the kind of thing you could talk about with employers because, like we've talked about, they are not really understanding of people's systems. But the reality is that if I'm given a deadline for something and I meet it and using my own system, it has always been effective for me.
I will say that a lot of, oh, excuse me, sorry. I would say most employers, what they really care about is the bottom line, and did you meet the outcome in that deadline? Um, and so while they want you to do something in a certain way, as long as you're meeting that outcome, I think usually you can fly under the radar to an extent. But finding out those strategies that work with you, and don't be afraid to kind of go into those things that people have always told you are bad. Again, if you are meeting deadlines, doing your thing, and the reason, thinking about the reason why you might be stressed. And again, for Molly, it was because everyone else's expectations were, this is wrong, don't do this. But it worked for how Molly's brain is. Um, and then my third opportunity is it is different. It's a different process, not a unique process. Um, uh, the hesitancy to be like, everybody's different, but more, every graduating college student is theoretically going through these exact same stages, right? Everyone is expected to go to class full time, maybe have an internship, and also at the same time be aggressively and applying and interviewing and even accepting and then negotiating job offers, all while trying to finish capstone projects, hanging out with your friends, finding new places to live, figuring out what all those things mean on this very condensed timeline. Everybody's going through the same thing. And so it's okay to, I mean, neurotypicals are kind of along the lines of, fake it till you make it. I'm not good at that, as you may have picked up on by now. But like, while the approach to it for autistic students might be different or will be unique, will be different, it doesn't necessarily mean what you're doing is unique. Everyone is having that same experience. Um, Anything to say about that, Molly?
Um, I don't really have anything to add. I think you got it.
Crushed it. Okay. And so the other thing is, I said this a long time ago, like way in the beginning, that one of the key indicators of getting a job is having a job, right? So, and we talked about applying for all the jobs and all the jobs, all of them that you might be even be qualified for and not hate doing, because your first job does not have to be your last. That does also mean, the caveat of that is that also means you do have to go through the application and interview process and everything else. We probably also don't want to have a new job every 6 months, but one of the best ways to combat the unemployment rate, um, is to land a job before you graduate and start that job, and find ways to be like, not find ways to be successful, and try it out. And if it is awful, you can get a new job. Um, I'm not trying to make it sound very easy, but knowing that like in school, you kind of have to finish school to get a degree. And if you don't get a degree, then you can't do the thing you want to do with your degree. Um, Once you have a job, it's kind of, you can take elements you like at that job and then pick what makes more sense for me in the future. Um, I don't know if anyone has ever said this. You have permission to change your mind at any point in time. I changed my major in college at least 6 times. I've changed careers, like not just jobs, like careers 4 times, and I'm 41. Um, and I say that to say, what we think is always going to happen doesn't always end up how it is. And giving yourself permission to embrace the fact that it is scary, embrace that there is so much unknown, and how to, like, coping strategies to work through that piece. So I guess, Molly, and this is not a question I said ahead in time, I'm sorry. Thinking about what I just said in terms of how you're looking at this job search, yes, it would be great if you found a forever job, but you're also open to, this might be my first job, and then moving into new things. How are you working through a lot of that uncertainty right now?
I would say, yeah, when I first got to college, I wanted my first job to be the job. I was like so stuck on that. But I think the closer I get to it, the more I'm realizing, especially with internships, realizing that there are so many jobs out there, and it's really, 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 really hard to learn about jobs without, getting closer to them. Um, I think it's difficult to even, make a decision on what to major in because it's really hard to know what jobs are like until you're out there, working alongside them. So I've gotten much more comfortable with the fact that, you just have to get a job and then, you might meet a coworker who has a job that, is similar to yours, but maybe is closer to your interests. And I'm learning that that might be a more effective way to learn about jobs and what is a better fit.
Also, I want to point out that that is a very perfect way to go about employment. That's how a lot of people do get raises, or how they decide to find the field that makes the most sense for them, is they start in one position, and then even if they stay in the same company, moving to a different position, or they again might leave the company and go into a position that's super similar. Um, I feel like I'm supposed to be saying something else right now. Hold on, let me zoom out. Okay. Um, okay, my next slide, because I wanted to leave lots of time for questions because this is such a weird topic. Oh yeah, so that is kind of like the basis of our conversation and kind of where we went. And I'm kind of hoping to use this time for people to ask questions to me or Molly about specifically how to support you and ideas that you might have. Have at it in the questions.
Well, thank you, Emily and Molly. This concludes the presentation portion and begins the Q&A session of today's webinar. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your control panel. Because our time is limited, we may not be able to get through all your questions, and if there are any questions that we don't get to today, we'll try to get back to you by email. So let's start with Molly. Our first question is, what strategies and systems have you found useful?
Sorry, is that strategies and systems for finding a job or?
That's on me. Strategies in the systems, in assisting you working through this transition, and also like at jobs.
I would say, as I mentioned before, just accepting that we all have a unique system for getting things done and sort of embracing mine. Um, and then also, as I mentioned before, finding a social circle. So embracing my circle here at Marquette in terms of Emily at On Your Mark, and then my friends, and then my parents back at home, texting them, calling them. And then moving into getting a job, I know that building that social circle, but also staying in touch with my current one will be huge.
Oh yeah, that reminds me, we had a really big conversation about like knowing who your people are, and how that is one thing that's going to help you feel like you are super engaged in your community, but also that you always remember who you are and like feeling confident in what you're doing.
Fantastic. All right. This next question, charisma test. Yes. Would disclosure of autism prior to the interview be helpful?
So this is a question, is an age-old question. I wish I had the correct answer all the time. I feel like if like I know for a fact that I am a socially awkward human being, and I will disclose it to the HR. If I know the process, I will, let me try again. I will disclose it to HR to say, hey, it would be helpful for me to have this accommodation during the interview if I could have the questions ahead of time, and know kind of the format. From that perspective, yes. If it is a company whose culture you can find out they might be a little more old school and stiff, I would not disclose. If it's one that, based on if you went to like career for everything else and you know the culture is kind of a little bit more accepting, I've had students who drop it into interview questions. I've had students say in their what's it called, a cover letter, um, that is a thing that they've done and been employed and been great. So the answer is it depends, um, versus absolutely do it. I think if you are someone who struggles to do the format charisma piece of an interview, there are ways to disclose if you've set it once you can like kind of see the interview may not be going well because of that piece, not basically what you're saying. I have lots of thoughts on that. Reach out to me and we can talk about it more for your specific situation. Sorry.
Right, so this question is for Molly. What advice do you have for recent and soon-to-be graduates, job seekers?
Um, I mean, I guess I would just go back to the things that I've previously mentioned about the support network being the biggest thing. But also, I mean, a lot of it is a numbers game. I think, yeah, I've talked about this with Emily, just applying to a lot of jobs, and then putting too much pressure on, applying to finding a job that you really like and you really want, and then, trying to like nail the interview, just, going into each one with a, I hope this goes well, and kind of just preparing for it the best you can, but not putting too much pressure on each and every one, because as we've also talked about, finding a job is the most important thing, and then it's always going to get easier after you have that experience. So just sort of looking for the jobs that you are a good enough fit, you are willing to work and everything, that are applicable to you, and then from there, just sort of being open to how it all goes.
Similar to kind of like applying for college, when you apply for all the colleges, then you have your safety schools and your dream schools.
All right, I think this question looks like it'd be for both of you. It's a two-parter as well. How did you find a system at work that worked for you, and advocate for yourself with your supervisor so they understood what you need?
Molly, I can go first as a seasoned professional. So for me, I discovered that I hold a lot of information here, and then when I try to do it out loud, it comes out a jumbled mess a lot. So in my office, not anymore, I had giant like whiteboards that had different sticky notes all over it to kind of organize the different thoughts in my brain. There was a flaw to that system because paper kept falling down. But I realize what it is I need to have visual reminders of what my train of thought is. I need to have visual reminders of what I'm supposed to be doing, even if it isn't a novel task, even if it's a routine. I needed to have something physically to remind myself. And so now I have a piece of technology. It's called Books, Boox. And instead of having 15 million, not literal, but like legal pads with all those things around my office, they all live in one little kind of Kindle shaped thing. I found that out through trial and error because in my brain, I would say, okay, I'm going to write this curriculum, and I would spend 1 week writing like a semester and a half worth of curriculum for 4 different sections of a course. And that sounds wild. And then I would get burned out. And then I realized the only reason I was doing it that way is because if I didn't do it right away, I would never get it done. So thinking about the functions behind your current systems and what might be more efficient is kind of how I did that first part. And then the second piece about advocating for myself, with my most jobs, I don't know, Molly, you can say if this is not your experience, you have a meeting with your immediate supervisor at some point during your onboarding. And I have gotten used to the fact if I don't speak up for myself, no one else will. And so I'll say, hey, the best way to work for me is this. And I also need to know if I have a question, do you want me to write it down? Do you want me to email it to you? Do you want me to ask you? I don't want to be annoying, but I will have a lot of questions right away. And then I also noticed I asked a lot of questions that seemed like I was maybe challenging their authority or their processes. And so I very clearly just said, if I'm asking questions, usually I'm asking so that I can understand the function of something so that I can do it how you're doing it, or we can think about how we can be more innovative with it. If it comes off as I'm challenging you, please let me know so I can restate my question. I've had supervisors say I've never had anybody directly communicate what their needs are, and that's been super great for them. So yeah. I don't know if that'll be helpful for you. It's worked for me repeatedly in my career. Molly's turn.
Speaking of reminders, could you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, can we send it over to it says, how do you find a system at work that worked for you? And then advocate for yourself with your supervisor so they understood what you need.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, my biggest system by far is note taking of all sorts. To-do lists being the biggest one. Similarly, if I don't write it down, I will not remember it. It doesn't have to be visible, it just has to all be together in one place. And then advocating, I would say, I'm not great at being super proactive about things, but once I realize there's a problem, I do like to address it as soon as possible. And sometimes for me, that means sending an email because I find it difficult to do the face-to-face thing for some topics, but that has always worked for me.
All right. This next question is for Molly. I know that job search can be quite painful, especially in areas that are outside of the medical fields and hard sciences, example, biochem physics. I have a PhD in special education, and I'm having difficulty finding employment. Are you having difficulties finding employment in your field of economics? What sorts of jobs have you applied for?
So the jobs that I'm applying for right now are all they all have like analyst in the name. So I'm not exactly sure how, I guess, the perception of my personality fits with that or anything like that, like by employers. But I guess I would say in previous jobs, I've definitely had to sort of, like we were saying with interviews, some of them go well, some of them don't. And I've found that, the ones where they really expect you to have a certain kind of personality, you can tell in the interview when it's going well, when it's not, pretty immediately. But I think sometimes you just have to keep interviewing, and one of those interviews will just fortunately go well. And after you get in there, they're going to see you as a whole person and not just you as an interview. And that's, how that has sort of worked for me. I'm not sure about your specific situation. Maybe Ellie can speak more on that.
Something that immediately came to my mind is people see PhD and what they perceive with PhD, which is so weird to me how people have ideas of what that means. And another thing I thought about is policy and looking at, this is not the question you asked, but my immediately thought was like someone who has a PhD in special ed and the state of special ed, I'm going to go on a rant. Right now, having someone who actually understands how not neurotypical brains work, how autistic brains work, like that would be phenomenal in policy driving things. Sorry, that's not the question you asked, but my brain eventually got very excited about that. Let me, that was my thing. I'm gonna say go ahead and ask the question because I can't see it and I'll just take the risk.
Okay, let's see here. I have one here that probably be answered by both of you. What resources during college can help you find internships?
Molly, do you want to go first or you want me to do it?
Sorry. So one thing that we've done is go to job fairs, but honestly, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't found them very helpful. I think our school has a website called Handshake, which I think specifically, it's a job listing platform, I think specifically geared towards colleges. And I feel like that has been the most helpful to me in terms of finding things that are actually applicable to my situation. I know, so the first internship I got was actions. Emily helped me get it because she knew someone who worked in City Hall. And at that point, basically, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in terms of internships. She was encouraging me to, get one anyway. And then the second one, my supervisor at that internship, I think, wrote, or not wrote recommendation, but was recommended me for, but otherwise I just applied for on their website. The third one, I applied for it through Handshake.
I think one way to find internships and things during and like job opportunities during college, aside from looking at like Handshake, you pay tuition at a university that has a career center. They are obligated to serve all of their students. What I have found, I guess I'm a professional coming to them as a professional, is that they generally want to do their job well. But as Molly said, like I knew somebody in City Hall and I was like, ooh, you guys are looking for interns. Um, Part of it is, a lot of it is just knowing what conversations are happening and knowing what's going on. Um, Government agencies are phenomenal resources for internships. Nonprofit organizations have a lot of internships. Large sports organizations have internships in ways that I didn't even think were actual internships. I think one was like not volunteer engagement, but like social responsibility internship kind of things. Um, I think looking in places you may not have considered or be interested in is one way to do it too. And then I think Handshake is good. What else have I done? I've literally Googled internships in fill in whatever city, or and lots of stuff will come up, and some are good, some are not so good. Or just I've had students have success. There was a company they wanted to intern with, and they sent an email saying, I'm wondering what your internship cycle would be. And they responded, oh, here's the information. I don't remember if they got that one or not, but it was cool to see that by taking that initiative, the company responded within like a couple weeks. So being a little assertive doesn't hurt.
I also just want to add, um, although my first one was a connection, you really don't need an Emily Raclaw to have that sort of experience. A lot of professors are very happy to help with that sort of thing. I've had professors send emails about internships, but if you ask, they know that you're looking for an internship, a lot of them are more than happy to help. And it's also a numbers game. So like my most recent internship, I think I applied to like 11 and I got interviews for 2, and then I ultimately got 1. So.
And that's actually typical statistics for job applications too. The same thing applies to research opportunities. Let your professors know, let your advisor know, tell everybody. The more people don't know what you're looking for if you don't share that information too. And something just like, I have students who have like a form email they'll send out, figuring out what it is you're looking for, call it an elevator pitch, whatever, and share that with faculty, staff, etc.
All right, Molly, this is sort of on the same vein, but this time for preparing for interviews. Do you have any best practices that you could share when it comes to preparing for interviews?
I would say, so with On Your Mark, we prepared for like specific questions, and I feel like with questions that are a little bit more vague, like tell me about yourself, that's very helpful. Otherwise, I get very rambly. But I think for some of the more specific ones, like the name a time when, things like that, first of all, those questions are just very hard. And you can't always really prepare for them because there are so many different versions of that question that you cannot prepare for every answer. So instead, I sort of like to, before the interview, take time to think about my previous experiences. So, going through my resume, thinking about the sort of things that I did at my internships, did with my leadership opportunities at Marquette, things I did in my classes, connections that I made, projects that I did, that sort of thing. So that I have those sort of things ready to go. Always make sure I have my resume in front of me during it. And apart from that, I think just really making sure that I'm not, I've said this 10 times, but that I'm not putting too much pressure on myself, that I'm staying relaxed and just letting it kind of go how it goes, because that always turns out the best.
I'd agree. I think something to remember is that with just like joining conversations or like talking to random people, there's like a 50% acceptance or like chance that you will have a successful connection. Job interviews, we already know that what they're looking for and what they put down may not even if you give the best interview of your life, they might pick somebody else for a reason that has nothing to do with you. And yeah, Molly's strategies are phenomenal and great. And that I think we also talked about how keeping in mind that not everybody is super honest when they ask those questions of tell me a time when. So that's something to keep in mind of when you can't think of something very specifically. It can be a combination, how you answer that question can be a combination of situations that help answer that question, because what they're asking is not what happened in that situation. They're trying to assess your skill set for that, if that kind of situation were to arise.
Well, looks like we have run out of time for any more questions. Is there anything that you each would like to say in closing before I do my closeout?
I would just like to thank everybody for coming, and I hope that this was normalizing, somewhat helpful. Again, we're all going through it. Well, not me, I'm old now, but you're going through it. Everyone's going through it together. It can be a painful and stressful process, but there can be success. Trust yourself, and you know yourself best, and you're an expert on yourself.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Emily and Molly, and thank you everyone for joining us today. If you found today's event helpful, we encourage you to register for OAR's next webinar event, the Autism Inclusion in the Workplace panel on October 12th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Once you close out of today's event, you will receive an exit survey. We would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. Everyone will receive a follow-up email today with their certificate of attendance. On behalf of the Organization for Autism Research, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, both of you.